Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. Gavin, Schall, Alex, Wolfe. Today we continue our mailbag series, picking out Jalen Brunson's dream running mate and which Knick is going to make the biggest leap next season. That right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, and we want to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, because they're now available on all platforms, and that includes on YouTube. So if you don't see our smiling faces on a day-to-day basis, be sure to subscribe and hit that notifications bell so you never miss them again. But whose faces should you want to see? I'm Gavin, Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster in the heart of lacrosse season. He is Alex Wolfe, editor-in-chief of the Strickland, the greatest Knicks website in the whole wide world. The New York Knicks eliminated from the playoffs, but that means we get to take your questions. And the first one is a loaded one. Comes from our friend, Strickland notable Colin Loring, at I never know how do you why is that just for the French connection in there? Why the G in there?
That beats me. I mean, all right. Maybe just because Colin Loring was taken already, so he went with Cologne Loring. It beats me.
All right. Well, we'll have him on at some point to figure it out. And he wants to know no restrictions, currently under contract, etc. Outside of overall price to land them, who's your favorite number 2 to Jalen Brunson's number 1? Who would make for a good co-star? Alex, I'm throwing that to you.
Yeah. So the general premise of this, is basically that you, at least the way that I took it, is that you can basically force any team in the league to make a trade, but you have to be ethical about it and give them fair value. So it's like if you went in NBA 2K and turned on forced trade mode, but then also were like, but I want to make sure I give everybody a fair shake here. So let's make sure
that Sour Patch Kids commercial where it's like first they're sour,
then they're sweet. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you be sour, steal someone else's star, but then you're sweet and you give them at least an
RJ Barrett.
An RJ Barrett, a good trade package. So I ranked I'll just run through my honorable mentions and then get through to the guy that I actually would pick here and my reasoning behind it. So in reverse order here, I wrote out the guys and I guess I came up with a top 6. Initially, I was going for a top 5, but I got carried away. But so Joel Embiid would be towards the end of the list, a little too injury prone, but undoubtedly an amazing player, but also arguably reaching the tail end of his prime, given that he's in his late 20s and bigs don't last forever. Jason Tatum, really, really talented, obviously, but given that we have to give up a fair price for this guy, I feel like, considering how good he is and how young he still is and how much he's accomplished, which I think would add into cost factors, I put him lower on the list just because it would cost an arm and a leg to get him if you're doing fair value. Jokic, same deal. Prime of his life, prime of his career, 2-time MVP, obviously going to the NBA Finals right now. Amazing player, but you'd have to give up quite literally the whole team to get him. Giannis, similar logic as well. Although I feel like you'd have to go out slightly less since the afterglow of his previous MVPs is worn off a little bit. And there's obviously the concerns over getting knocked out in the first round this year. I feel like if he would get traded right this second, his value would be a little lower.
Also, just 2 years left on his contract.
Yeah, and just 2 years left on his deal. Jimmy Butler next. Because of his age, I feel like the relative cost to get him, in a vacuum like this question says, would be lower. However, because of his age, I don't know that I would want to make that investment for a 1 or 2 year rental. Or let's say that he even plays 3 more years, whatever. But he is older than you might think, even with his amount of rambunctiousness. So I would question making that decision, which leads me to my top candidate, and that's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander from the Oklahoma City Thunder. He's my number 1 guy. He's the guy that, we've talked about him a number of times for a reason, because he's really, really good and has only gotten better. He just finished his 5th year in the NBA. He's only 24 years old, averaged 31.4 points per game on really good efficiency overall, although he he didn't shoot as well from three this year and didn't take as many of them. I guess sort of realizing for whatever reason, the last 2 years, he's taking a decent step back in 3-point efficiency. But at one point in his career, did shoot 42% on 5 attempts per game. And presumably with a little more open looks could probably convert better on that when he's not being as much of the focal point as he was on Oklahoma City's last couple of years. And yet still really impressive the fact that he was able to get up to 31.5 points per game while only shooting 34.5% on 2.5 3-point attempts per game. And I just think he's a really complete player. He's so young. It's sort of the perfect guy I would look for to complement Jalen Brunson. And also just sort of like a more actualized version of RJ Barrett. So I would imagine in this deal, since it would just be like pure equal value, you would probably give up like RJ Barrett, perhaps Quentin Grimes or Emmanuel Quickly, one of those two. If I had to pick, I would probably say like RJ and Quickly, just because I think that Grimes would be a better fit with SGA going forward and could sort of slide to the three, like be the starting three for you then. And then a bunch of picks would be what it would come down to, probably like 4 or perhaps 5 if you're including like all of the protected picks. Like I would consider like the Washington and Detroit picks, since they're so heavily protected, to be weighted almost like a regular first round pick. The Milwaukee one looks pretty solid, so I think that would get valued pretty well. And then maybe the Dallas pick as well and one of the Knicks' own picks, so you still kind of come out relatively unscathed. Granted, you made the point, Gavin, like I don't think we should be expecting this, like, because OKC, why would they do this? But I would definitely look at it. I really like it, as I like SGA as a fit for the Knicks and for Jalen Brunson.
Yeah. My short/long list was pretty similar to yours. So I'll skip over the reasoning on some people. I had Jokic, I had Embiid, I had Tatum, I had Giannis, who, spoiler, might end up winning it. But here's some other guys. Paul George, obviously, I mention him all the time. The only issue is he's 33 and he's pretty injury prone. Kawhi Leonard, a little bit younger, but even more injury prone. That being said, if I was looking at just like a shorter, or I don't know, I guess if you could also turn off injuries in this universe, if we're still operating like in the 2K world, like I think Kawhi might be my number one option. Just a 3-level scorer who's also an elite defender. To me, that's kind of the dream for any NBA team, but especially when you already have your point guard in place. And we saw the model of Kawhi and Kyle Lowry have a lot of success, and Brunson's a more dynamic offensive player, will not be quite the defender that Lowry is. But I think that's a very good framework. Like those two plus a lot of depth, like would equal multiple titles. But again, you just like, it would be a nightmare to give Kawhi a 5-year contract right now with all the injuries he's had. Tatum, the younger version of that. Again, like I think you have to give up literally everything for Tatum, literally everything for Jokic. So that would be tough. Jaylen Brown, you give up a lot less, but I don't think he's quite good enough to push you over the edge. LeBron James made my list, but probably just too old. And of course he could just retire.
Certain sports books have the Knicks as the favorite to land him.
I saw. I don't want to indulge that. We've gone down that road before, even on this podcast. I think ultimately I would probably go with Giannis, who does not solve the shooting concerns that the Knicks have, and you would have to drastically restructure your roster to fit around him. And you would hope, and I'm not sure if this is the case, but you would hope you could make that trade and hold on to, like, I'm not even going to be delusional enough to say both of Quickly and Grimes, but one of Quickly and Grimes. And let's just say like the trade is like Grimes, RJ, Randall, and every pick, maybe Obi if they want him to, for Giannis for 2 years. And this is in a scenario where Giannis demands out and says, hey, I want to go to the Knicks. And Milwaukee's like, all right, this dude's done everything for us. He's going to leave in 2 years anyways. Let's just get everything for him. And even then, I doubt the Knicks could pull that off. But if your base of restarting your roster is Brunson, Quickly, Giannis, like you probably have enough there to build something. I don't know, Alex, am I crazy? Like, would I be better off going with like the Paul George version where maybe I don't know, like maybe you get Paul George basically for RJ Barrett and picks and you just slot Paul George into this team next year and you say, let's ride?
Yeah, I don't know. And I wonder if, that's probably a deal that the Knicks could actually get.
Yeah.
would be like Paul George for RJ and a few picks,
Yeah.
It's tough though. I think we've already mentioned this. Like, it's telling that even if given the ability to get any player that we want right now, it's such a difficult landscape in the NBA where it's just like there's sort of this changing of the guard happening, and yet the changing just isn't quite happening yet. You know what I mean? It feels like there's a lot of established guys like the Paul Georges, Kawhis, Jimmy Butlers, LeBron, obviously, like older guys that you would think like, okay, these guys should be aging out. And yet a lot of these guys like Jimmy Butler, for example, or like LeBron, who just made the Western Conference Finals, are still sort of like lingering, and it's like, okay, well, these guys clearly are the ones that are still kind of stirring the drink in the NBA. And yet to trade for them is very short-sighted because they're older and there's only so many years left that they're going to play. So do you really want to like trade what it would cost to get these guys when you already have some really decent young players on your own team that are sort of developing and not finished products yet? And yet then some of the other, younger guys you could potentially go after, it would cost an arm and a leg to trade for them because they're younger and they're stars, and they'll get valued as such until such a day that they're older and, then just more available, I guess. I don't know. It's tough. It's a tough question. And honestly, for the Knicks, like whenever they do look to make that big deal, that big splash, it's going to be intriguing to see what type of player they go for and who would be on their dream list. Because it's a really interesting question. Gavin, do you have any final notes on that before we take things to the opposite end of the spectrum in our next segment and talk about development?
Just that, to your point, it's harder to go all in than like there's always a trade-off to going all in unless you are the Golden State Warriors and you sign Kevin Durant straight up. And we've seen it since the big three. Like that was unprecedented when it happened, but it also hasn't really happened a lot since where stars of that caliber just move teams. And I think in the era of these guys trying to get their bag to the maximum extent and then get traded, like that's going to be even harder. And I just think in kind of a big picture sense, the Knicks and maybe more importantly than the Knicks, I think the Knicks know like their fans like have to remember that going forward. Like there's a big trade-off to not building it organically.
Yeah, there for sure is. And if you want to, oh man, what a transition. If you want to build your car organically, I don't know. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guarantee Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and then look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And that's what I did. I've bought some parts off eBay Motors. I have a Toyota Prius because I need that gas efficiency because I have a pretty long commute to work in the morning. And I found myself in the market for some wheel inserts. I don't know, like to make my wheels look a little prettier. These little like caps that pop in the middle of the rim. And I got them off eBay Motors for like under half what the dealership was going to charge me for new hubcaps, which was awesome. And my car looks cooler now. So I'm happy I went there. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time, just like I was on eBay Motors. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, Gavin, we're back in to continue answering mailbag questions. This one comes from one of our good buddies. He always just gives us tons of mailbag questions to answer, which we're very grateful for. Jordan Bub on Twitter at Bub Jordan. Which player on the Knicks do you expect to see most improvement from next season? And how would player improvement affect the Knicks ceiling for next season? So we answered something similar on our first mailbag one, but we didn't really get into which Knicks we most expect to improve. Gavin, so who's number one on your list as far as who you expect to see the most improvement?
Yeah, Alex, I've referenced him before, but I think Quentin Grimes has a chance to make an Emmanuel Quickley-esque 3-year leap where I think Grimes fits a very similar profile to Quickley in that we've seen the highs at different points, right? We've seen the playmaking. We've seen the ability to beat his man off the dribble, get to the rim and dunk or finish through contact or finish athletically. We've seen extraordinary all-time toughness, like when his leg fell off and he reattached it and then shut down Jimmy Butler. We've seen shot making, like games where he's made 7, 8, 9 threes. We haven't seen it all come together consistently. And I think next year will be the start of that. And maybe like quickly, then we'll see a regression in the playoffs. And then year 4, year 5 will be where it really all coalesces. But I think the Knicks get a version of Quentin Grimes that you can reliably start night in and night out. And as we've noted before, because of his defense, because of his threat as a shooter, he finds a way to have a positive impact, Alex, even when he's not having a great shooting game. But I think the great shooting games are more consistent. And the nights where he's way off are less consistent, because I think he's going to find ways next year when the threes aren't falling. He's like, all right, I'm going to get to the rim and get some free throws. All right, I'm going to be a secondary playmaker. And I do think it's somewhat contingent on how the Knicks restructure their roster, because if you come in with Brunson, RJ, Randall, he's just going to get less opportunities as a creator inherently, and it's going to be forced to stay in that spot up role. But I kind of have a gut instinct that one of RJ or Randall's off this team to start next year. And even if you're replacing like that guy with a star, like I think the ecosystem is going to be more favorable to Quentin Grimes next season.
Yeah, and if you look at the progression of how his career has gone so far, now granted he had to kind of earn his keep the first season, as a rookie, and kind of like found his way into the rotation eventually, and then just kind of got a stranglehold on that spot and never let go. In year 2, it was like he came back from injury, more or less claimed his rotation spot pretty quickly. And I think that like his shooting improvement has been good enough too, in the sense that he's upped his volume, and yet, and again, if we take the playoffs out of it, because he definitely struggled this year, like I would almost argue that he got his like playoff foibles out of the way this year already, because he took a ton, and he was relied on a ton, and seemed like maybe the moment just kind of got to him a smidge. There's a lot of pressure on taking those big shots in big playoff games. So hopefully he kind of got that out of the way. But, as you've noted a ton of times, like he shot like 45% down the stretch of the season from 3 on like 8 attempts per game. Like he was taking a ton. I think there's a world where he takes a leap that's almost similar to like when Klay Thompson kind of like stepped his game up, where it was like the form is there, everything is there. It just hadn't quite clicked yet. But then once it does, and he finds that consistency where he can be a consistent like 40% 3-point shooter all the time, then it's going to be rough times for the rest of the NBA, because he also, unlike a player like a Klay Thompson, and look, I'm not saying that he's going to turn into Klay Thompson like next year, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he did. Unlike Klay Thompson, he's got a lot of confidence off the dribble.
All right, wait, hold up. Prime Klay he wasn't getting all the way to the rim, but he was a good ISO. Like, remember that game when he got hurt? He had 40 points. Like,
yeah, I guess that's true. I guess that's true. Yeah, I mean, but the joke with Klay was always like he doesn't even dribble, but he'll still score 40 on you.
He had the 60-point game where he took like 2 dribbles, I think.
Yeah, so exactly.
All right, fair
Whereas Grimes, I think, would be a little more adept at attacking closeouts, getting all the way inside, because Grimes can get all the way inside. And then, his passing, I think, is better than a player like a Klay too. So, and not to say the Klay isn't good at the swing passes and all that stuff as well. I'm not trying to like crap on Klay Thompson at the expense of
it's easy when you post stuff.
Yeah. But anyway, I think as far as the other guys, I mean, we've talked about the others so much, but I would probably say, like, in order, I guess I would expect about an equal amount of improvement out of RJ and Quickly, and I would hope it would just be kind of like refining what they did best this year and turning it into consistency. Obviously Quickly they were sort of like a tale of two players. Like RJ had a really rough regular season, but a pretty great postseason. And then Quickly had a pretty great regular season and a pretty tough postseason. So I would hope that both those guys could kind of solve those issues. For RJ, I would just hope, like, that utilize what you've figured out as far as getting inside, drawing free throws, stuff like that, and then just continue taking like 8 million jumpers until you can find a way to just shoot like 36% from 3 on like 4 attempts per game. And like, that's good enough. Like that'll draw respect from other defenses. That's really what RJ needs to do, is just get good enough at shooting threes to draw respect from other defenses, and then quickly just find consistency, because I just don't want to see any more from quickly of like shooting 40% for a month and then shooting like 20% for a month from three. And that's kind of been like the common theme for him throughout his career so far. So hopefully those two are roughly equal. Otherwise, Obi and Mitch. I mean, Obi, I expect to see some improvement from, but if he's still on the team, we won't get to see half of it because he won't be playing that much because he'll be behind Randall. Mitch, I feel like has sort of reached something close to what his ceiling could be.
Yeah.
Going forward, which is fine because it's a great ceiling, but I don't know how much development I'm thinking.
Yeah, Mitch would just be somehow to make him like, I don't know if you have to put him in like an Iron Man suit or what, but just make him like 10% sturdier would go a long ways. But to wrap this up, answer the second part of the question, how it would affect the Knicks ceiling. I think potentially pretty dramatically. Like I think again, like the best version of Quentin Grimes that and again, maybe this is ambitious for next year, but combines all of his best qualities and plays like it. Like if he had like a breakout series against Miami, and we said it, like he dropped, what was it, 23 points in his last game of the regular season against the Heat. Like he had it within him. And like if we got that guy every single game, Alex, like I don't think it would have been crazy for the Knicks to beat the Heat. I don't think it would have been crazy for the Knicks to beat the Celtics. Like maybe next year, like things normalize a little bit. And maybe the Bucks are even more fearsome and they go on a revenge tour. Like I was saying all year, and well, not all year, but because it was kind of theoretical, but throughout the playoffs, like that was my one nightmare matchup for the Knicks. And the one team, like even if everyone played at their best, like I just thought there's too much size, too much physicality, zero answer for Giannis. Like I didn't think the Knicks were going to beat that team. But pretty much anyone else with the best version of Grimes, like we are in kind of an age of parity in the NBA, and this is probably something we'll get into more and more over the course of the offseason. But I think the improvements the Knicks have to make to be a finals contender, the bar is lower than it's been in past years. So let's take one final break, come back, and when we return, one great question from Puffy McTree, and maybe one more. We'll get into that next on Locked On Knicks. All right, Alex, this one comes from Puffy McTree at PMC Tree, P McTree. It's a long one, so we'll get into it. With how few elite guys there are and how hard it is to acquire said guys, could the best play possibly be building the roster around the idea of Brunson and Donovan Mitchell playing together? Wow, throwback. Rumors are already swirling. He has his mindset, he being Mitchell, set on coming here in 2 years. What is the best way to maximize a roster around them? Maybe using some of the war chest to acquire players you can see will be the right role players around them. I know it's not perfect, but having those two guys in a playoff series is going to be a real problem for defenses.
Yeah, I talk about getting like PTSD from like last offseason.
I feel like it's 2022, baby.
Yeah, like we're back to talking about Donovan Mitchell again. Cool. I don't know. I think Puffy's got a point here. I mean, I think that there's a real value at this point to if you can maneuver yourself well enough to get someone via free agency rather than via trade, and like a big addition like a Donovan Mitchell like that, like that's now becoming sort of a rarity. Like guys sort of get their money and then, force a trade rather than, trying to go somewhere in free agency and take less money, because there's like a huge, like enormous financial incentive for like the top, I don't know, like 3-4% of players in the NBA to take their max extensions rather than go somewhere in free agency. Like it quite literally is the difference between like $35 million a season and like $50+ million a season, which is not insignificant over the course of like a 4 or 5 year deal. So I don't totally blame players, for wanting to get their most value possible, because like they're making the league a ton of money, and that's the only way that they can see anything close to the amount of money that they pull in for the league. So from a Mitchell perspective, it's an interesting question then, because he would probably have to forego re-signing that next supermax.
Just for context, right? Jalen Brown would be giving up $40 million over 5 years to do that same thing.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like would Mitchell be interested in doing that just to come to the Knicks? Like, does he really want to be on the Knicks that bad? We'll see what happens in the next 2 years too. Like, I feel like maybe it'll be very dependent on how the Cavs do. Like, if the Cavs just get knocked out in the first round 2 more times, then maybe he's like, well, it was fun, but obviously this team's going nowhere. Like, I'll take the financial hit and just go to New York or wherever it is that I want to go. But as far as like, should the Knicks be planning around this idea, I guess, which I guess isn't totally the question. It's more just like, would you start building? Well, I guess it sort of is, because it's the question is like, would you start using some of the war chests to acquire players you would see being a good fit around those two? I guess, but like, I guess the type of players that you would want to look for around those two anyway would be like shooting and defense, which you should be looking for anyway. So I guess in a weird way, sure, build like you're building for that backcourt, but also just build like you would normally, because I would not be making any sort of preparations in the summer of 2023 for Donovan Mitchell potentially in 2025, just because I don't know that he's that generational of a player that you plan like multiple years in advance and potentially like hamstring yourself.
And so it's still a poor fit, right? Like all the same questions we had last year about Mitchell and Brunson. Like, we just watched an undersized backcourt with a very similar profile. I know he wasn't that good in the series, but Darius Garland is a fantastic player, and I think someone who's going to make a bunch of all-star teams down the road, and maybe have some great duels with someone like Jalen Brunson down the road. Like, he's I think he's 3 years younger than Brunson. He's the same age as RJ. Like he might. This is not popular to say right now. He might end up being just as good of a player as Jalen Brunson, even if Jalen Brunson just stole his lunch and like threw him out the school, quote unquote, in that last series. I say that to say Cleveland has, on paper, kind of the perfect infrastructure around them, right? 2 elite defensive bigs. They were able to cover it up in the regular season. And of course, like, we can talk about their rebounding issues and whatnot, but the point is, like, that was a team that broke apart come playoff time. We saw it for years in Portland with Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, which was kind of the apex version of that, with Lillard being like if Steph Curry didn't exist, I really think Lillard would be like regarded as like an all-time great. Like Steph Curry kind of stole his corner in that respect. And him and CJ McCollum, they got all the way to the Western Conference Finals. They lost in 4 games, I believe, when they got there. Like, it is hard to build around an undersized backcourt. There are ways around it. And if you have a loaded enough team, it might not matter. But my point is, Alex, even in a world where you get him in free agency, and granted, this might be stupid because Donovan Mitchell's amazing. I don't know if the Knicks will ultimately want to make that financial allocation, like, particularly if there's a cleaner fit, which is a true star wing, a guy 6'6" or taller. Again, I always say it. I said it earlier this episode. I'll say it again. Paul George, Kawhi Leonard type of mold. Of course, that, like, beggars cannot be choosers. If the Knicks get no one the next couple of years and Donovan Mitchell wants to walk in that door, you take him and you figure it out. But it is not an ideal fit, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And that leaves aside too, like, the financial implications of planning for a guy like him so far in advance too. You have to sort of then build your team more like how the Knicks were doing it for like the years prior to getting Brunson, where it's just like contingencies on contingencies on contingencies. And like, you have to just be signing all these guys to short deals, which isn't appealing to potential free agents. And you have to plan to operate as an under the cap team. Like, our buddy Jeremy Cohen talks about this all the time. Operating as an over the cap team versus an under the cap team. And right now the Knicks should be, I think, planning more to operate as an over the cap team going forward, just because then you can maximize what you have on the roster. They're going to have to start paying guys soon too. So like, it's going to be inevitable. They're going to be over the cap. Like, RJ Barrett's extension kicks in this year. You're going to have to make a decision about Emmanuel quickly. Then right after that, like, by the time that Mitchell rolls around, you'll be having to make a decision about Quentin Grimes. Like, and I think that his extension would kick in that year or perhaps the year after. But there's a lot of decisions to be made as far as like offering out big money potentially, and also like how you would approach those other free agents or guys that you trade for, or what you would trade the war chest for. Like, it's a lot of moving parts to put in place for, as you said, an imperfect fit. Like, a guy that, no matter what, even if he brought his 100% best effort on defense, is still going to be a somewhat undersized backcourt with Jalen Brunson. And he definitely is not, like we've said before, like, oh, we could see a world where having quickly as you're starting to could work. And I stand by that. I think that could work, but only because quickly is such a dogged defender like he is. and has, I mean, he's built almost exactly like Donovan Mitchell, like 6'3" with like a very plus wingspan.
Yeah.
So Mitchell in an ideal world could be fine, but we've seen he's just not that defender.
Yeah, we've said it before. Like quickly, it's like he's just one of the best defenders on planet Earth. Like per pound, sure, but and maybe you wouldn't go so far as overall, but I'd call him a top 40 in the league guy in that category. And Mitchell's just not going to be that. He was better this year, but he's not what Emmanuel Quickly is. Who's brilliant on that end of the floor. So I think that's a good place to conclude it. In that it's not the best fit, but as I always like to say on this show, like there aren't like. You're usually not getting the perfect star. So like in a world where like Grimes is better, RJ's better, maybe even Quickly still involved, and you could trade one of those guys, like maybe the supporting cast is so good that you could slot Donovan Mitchell in and you could sacrifice your defense a little bit and it would all work out. But it's not like if I'm planning around someone, it's not Donovan Mitchell right now. But anyways, Alex, we have plenty of more mailbags. Plenty of more mailbag questions to come. We're still taking submissions. So if you want to tweet at us, if you want to comment, I know, Alex, you made a post on YouTube you could comment on. Usually we'll see it even if you comment on a video, but I think Twitter and the posts are the safer ways to go. We will take your questions. We will answer your questions, and we will enjoy doing so. But until next time, he's Alex. I'm Gavin, and we'll talk to you soon on Locked On Knicks.